Now, this time next week, come on, let's not be naive. We will have no idea the exact structure of government by this time next week. Chances are that it is going to be a coalition either on the left or the right, and it's probably going to involve Winston Peters. He'll probably still be fishing this time on Monday morning. That's certainly his form in previous elections. But hey, one thing we will know is that the voting process will be over and done with for another 3 years, and there will be people attempting to form a government if they haven't done so already. But, I mean, what sort of legislation will they put together? What type of agreement can you get between coalition parties? And what are some of the key issues that they need to get their heads around? Well, joining us on the program now from the Free Speech Union, Jonathan Ayling. Jonathan, kia ora, good morning.
Good morning.
Now, as if you didn't have enough on your plate, you and the team at the Free Speech Union have been working to draft some potential legislation in the area of free speech, because, you know, we've heard a lot about proposed hate speech laws and you guys pushing back on that. I must say, I'm pretty impressed that rather than just pick holes in other people's legislation, you've come up with some ideas of your own and actually got some traction from some of the political parties on this one.
Well, that's exactly right. We want to play a constructive role in this space as well as a defensive one. Our mission is to expand Kiwis' speech rights and reinvigorate this belief that actually everyone having a voice, everyone having a seat at the table is good for all of us. And so we're not content with just knocking back bad ideas. We want to put forward some good stuff. And with that in mind, we would say the best ideas probably won't come in the form of legislation. Laws are not the solution to the erosion of speech rights that we see in New Zealand at the moment. We need a cultural belief in this value. But the law, of course, has a part to play. And so we have worked with former Judge Dr. David Harvey. He was the longest serving judge on the district court up until he retired a few years back, and has been a real friend and supporter of the Free Speech Union in helping us assess the area of access to public venues. And Andrew, for any of the listeners that are familiar with the background of the Free Speech Union, you'll know that our first fights really emerged in this space. The Free Speech Coalition, our predecessor, emerged when Mayor Phil Goff tried to shut down access to a venue for 2 international speakers. We ended up taking that to the Supreme Court, and we also went to the High Court against Palmerston North City Council, who blocked access for Speak Up for Women, a traditional feminist group that was wanting to meet. And what we see are public venues where they should be operating with freedom for all Kiwis to come and participate in that civil society. We see them operating in a very biased and frankly intolerant way. And so we have drafted legislation that says there is a positive duty on public venues, those that are bound by the Bill of Rights Act, so they have to respect freedom of conscience, freedom of belief, the other basic civil liberties that we often take for granted in a liberal democratic society. And they must respect the right to gather and exercise free speech. And this is set juxtapose the duties that they currently have for health and safety. Mm-hmm. And we're saying that this legislation says free speech trumps health and safety laws. Because at the moment,
this is the get out clause, isn't it? That if anybody might be angry or upset about something that the speaker says, then we can ban them under health and safety, which, yeah, honestly doesn't have that many legs to stand on. But this is the excuse that the thugs veto are pushing forward at the moment.
That's right. Thugs veto is exactly what it is, Andrew. And for your listeners' sake, this is a term where individuals come and operate in what otherwise would be considered unlawful ways. Come and threaten either violent protest or disruptive protest. And there's kind of two ways that they can go about it there. They can claim that this causes me psychological harm, yep, and so I need to stand up against it, or I just don't like it and so I'm going to threaten to smash a window or something like that. Yep. And what we're saying is, well, if that is the case, that is, many people would say, well, that's why these events should be shut down, because people are going to get hurt. Well, if that's the case, then actually what needs to happen is the police need to do their jobs as they would in any other case where individuals are threatening unlawful activity, and actually operate as those that are defending public order and this the right to go about our everyday lives.
It's so ridiculous that the threats of violence aren't being shut down. The freedom of speech is being shut down in these situations.
We've really got this absolutely the wrong way round, but it seems to have somehow really caught on, even in the Supreme Court case that the Free Speech Union took over several years up until the beginning of this year. The Supreme Court ended up saying, well, actually, if people are going to get hurt, they need to stop those that are provoking violence. And we say, rubbish. Those that are threatening violence are the ones that need to be stopped. And Parliament needs to clarify this law. It is up to Parliament to set the laws of this nation, not the Supreme Court. Where we see this very advocacy-based court emerging, we actually need to have that counterbalance put in place. And so we have called on all parties to agree to put forward legislation that we have drafted, that we've consulted with the President of the Law Commission, with the Chief Advisor of the Ministry of Justice, and we have said these parties must agree that violence is not the answer, that's not a high standard to try and maintain, and that where people are exercising lawful speech, they must be allowed in public venues. And we're very pleased. We've had 3 parties come together, parties that perhaps will not agree on very much else, but say that they will support this legislation.
I mean, this is unusual that a group which isn't a political party is writing draft legislation and proposing it. I mean, of course, you've got think tanks and lobby groups and those sorts of people which have particular ideas, but to go to the extent of saying, and here's a starter for 10, here's some draft legislation, is this something that various political parties might consider adopting? Is there precedent for this type of thing, Jonathan?
Absolutely, there is. There are other civil society actors, such as the Taxpayers Union, who have also done considerable drafting efforts to propose these changes. But really, I think this is where that democratic process is so much bigger than just voting. For your listeners who haven't voted yet, make sure you do before Saturday. But that is just the cherry on top of the democratic process. Really, the democratic process is us each getting to participate in the laws and the society and the government that oversees our nation. And so, there are some that say, oh, this is lobby interest groups being introduced and big money trying to manipulate our society. I think it's a very cynical way of looking at it. This is what us being able to be at the table is about. And the Free Speech Union has a very wide variety of individuals that participate in our organization. But we've come together and said, hey, we're gonna do our bit to advocate for this basic value that has led New Zealand to be a peaceful, prosperous, safe, stable society. We haven't gotten to this incredible nation that we get to enjoy by accident. It has become because of a very deliberate set of values and beliefs and actions that flow from that our forefathers and foremothers, I should note, have really believed in. And we must continue that work.
I mean, it's one thing to propose the legislation, but I suppose it is democratically elected politicians that are able to form a government. As I say, that's not necessarily going to be a quick process. We'll see how we go with that. But it will be the politicians who are voted in that ultimately will make the decision about which legislation is put forward and voted on and those sorts of things. But we get to have our say between now and next Saturday, and including next Saturday, of course. We get to pick which parties we want to represent us in a representative democracy, and at least a few of those parties are in favour of this legislation. So, hey, look, we'll see what happens on Saturday, but this legislation may become law in New Zealand in the next political cycle, perhaps.
Well, based on the commitments we've received from these parties and the lobbying work we've done before releasing the legislation to make sure it was a law that was acceptable to politicians, I think it's very likely. We're heartened by the response we've received from National and ACT and New Zealand First. And Andrew, I stress that free speech is not a political issue. It's not a left-right issue. Both the left and the right have used and abused free speech, but there really is something quite distinct on offer in this election cycle, that on for National and ACT in New Zealand First, they've gone out to say we will support legislation that requires free speech to be protected in public venues.
Yeah.
And on the other side, Labour and Greens are saying if you vote for us, we will advance hate speech laws to ensure that certain perspectives and opinions are not allowed to be expressed. So from a free speech perspective, it's not that one side naturally fits or doesn't fit, but what we have on offer today very distinctly shows where these parties are lining up on free speech. And so I encourage your listeners, vote with that in mind.
Yeah.
Should you be allowed to have your say? Should you be allowed to think freely and express it? If so, then that's who you need to be voting for.
Further information about this legislation, of course, other issues that you're covering, fsu.nz. Jonathan, thank you so much for the work that you and the team are doing. Hey, this time next Monday, as I say, we'll still probably be a bit confused. But
your opening comment, Andrew. We'll this time next Monday we'll have a group on the left trying to form a coalition or a group on the right. This is why you're paid the big bucks. I mean, that sort of analysis, I tell you what, you won't get it elsewhere.
Exactly, and I'm pretty sure we won't know the answer for, well, perhaps a few days following on from that. Thanks again for joining us today.
Thanks, Andrew.